Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We have a very special event that we were put together with North Face, so we want to thank them, especially. We are Tattered Cover. We are an independent bookstore in Denver that is 50 years old, and it's thanks to readers like you and tonight's guests that have kept us going for half a century, so thank you so much. Tonight we have two very special guests, both are North Face athletes. Again, thank you to North Face for making this happen. We have Jimmy Chin in conversation with Conrad Anker. Jimmy Chin is an Academy Award-winning filmmaker, National Geographic photographer, and a professional mountain sports athlete. He has led or participated in cutting-edge expeditions around the world for over 20 years, including significant first ascents on all 7 continents, and his photographs have graced the cover of National Geographic magazine and the New York Times magazine. He also co-produces and co-directs with his wife, Chai, and their film Maru won the Audience Award at the Sundance Film Festival and was on the Academy Award shortlist for Best Documentary Feature. Jimmy, Chai, and their 2 children split their time between New York City and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Conrad has been pushing the limits of mountaineering for the past 30 years. The Bozeman, Montana-based father of 3 is one of the most prolific explorers and mountaineers alive today. He serves on the board of the Protect Our Winters, the American Himalayan Foundation, the Alex Lowe Charitable Foundation, and One Family Memphis. Please welcome Jimmy and Conrad, who are going to give us an amazing conversation. I'm so stoked to see them talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thanks, Tattered Cover, for 50 years of independent booksellers and going to Ushuaia to get on a boat. And so when this releases on December 8th, and everyone that's out there in December 8th, yeah, I'll be thinking of you. So, but I wish I was going with you, Jimmy, and your family and my family would be out there.
Yeah.
So we're penguin peeping from a boat, and I have the good fortune to lecture on history and glaciology. So
Cool. Yeah. Well, I always joke with people because the title of the book, which is There and Back, Photographs from the Edge, should probably be called There and Back with Conrad Anker. And Conrad was, so gracious to write a foreword to the book. So thank you for that. And yeah, it's been pretty amazing journey putting that book together.
yeah, to be here with you, Jimmy, and connecting on a Zoom call on different sides of, I'm in LA, you're in New York, and we're here. And you think back that first time we sat on that boulder in Tuolumne Meadows, and we'd been climbing for a few days, and it was like, you had this question, well, should I get into the outdoor world, and should I do this, and can I make a living doing this? And I was like, well, yeah, you just follow your dreams and everything will come into place. And to see that your skill with the camera, both still camera and a cinema camera, editing all this, to see your progression over a 20-year period is one of the big joys of my life. So, and humbled to be part of your book and have that you asked me to write the foreword, which was a lot of fun.
I know. I guess it was probably 1999 or 2000.
Yeah.
That we met and then spent some time in Tuolumne. And I don't know if many people know our history together, but just for a little context, when I first met Conrad, I had just finished an expedition to the Chiracusta Valley and in the Karakoram mountain range in Pakistan. It is the first chapter in the book. It was my first expedition, and that expedition to the Chiracusta was inspired by an expedition that Galen Rao, Peter Croft, and Conrad went on the previous year. And, I saw the story and I saw the photographs from Galen from that trip. And I remember looking at those photos and thinking, that's where I want to go. Like, if you're a real climber, like that's the kind of places you go. So literally the first expedition, photo essay is from the Chiracusa Valley, which was inspired by Conrad. And, Conrad's linked to so many pieces of this story, because after that expedition to the Chiracusa, I met Conrad and I asked Conrad if is it hard to shoot for the North Face? And, at the time, of course, I knew you as like the bigger than life legendary climber. I had, posters of Conrad and Alex and all these, other amazing athletes on my wall, read stories and articles about, Conrad's exploits. And here I was talking to Conrad. And I remember that moment feeling pretty intimidated, pretty vulnerable, and Conrad being like, oh yeah, it's easy to shoot for the North Face. Come on, let's go talk to the photo editor right now. And I was like, right now? And Conrad, and this is so classic, was like, no, we're going to do it right now. And he took me up and to meet with the photo editor. And Conrad suggested to the photo editor, hey, I have a shoot in October. Why don't we have Jimmy shoot it? And because it's Conrad, the photo editor didn't really have a choice. And he was like, sure, yeah, why don't you? So Conrad literally got me my first photo assignment, which happened to be like with the biggest outdoor brand, like probably the hardest brand to shoot for in the industry. And just like that, got me an assignment. And that was my first photo assignment. So you could say Conrad launched my career as a photographer, but also launched my life as an expedition climber, because I was inspired by his trip to the Chiracusa. And if you get your hands on the book, you'll see this arc of really our partnership over 20 years. The last expedition in the book is an expedition that Conrad and I did to Antarctica, to Queen Maud Land, to climb a first ascent of a big 4,000 foot alpine rock tower that was just mind-blowing, but also, just Conrad and I on that trip. So there's a lot of photos of Conrad from that last climb. And then in between, that first expedition and the last chapter of the book are many of our amazing adventures.
One of my favorite points that I always think about you, Jimmy, is your origin story when you went to go visit Galen. And so you wheeled up in your Subaru Legacy. You'd probably been climbing in Yosemite, and he had a studio in Emeryville. And it was there was photographs on the first floor, and he'd have events, but his offices were upstairs. And for every day, you're like, I'd like to visit with Galen. And they're like, well, he can't, he's booked and he's busy. And then Friday afternoon, Galen's like, oh, come on up here. And that was the image for the Chiracusa. He's like, go see this. And in a sense, my own climbing mentor, Mug Stump, he handed me a slide of Gurney Peak and the Kitchatna Spires. And this slide, he's like, yeah, send this to the Alpine Club. They'll give you the under 24 years climbing grant. And we got $400 and drove a Ford Econoline up to Alaska and went climbing. And it was that same sort of passing on of knowledge that when people have reached out to us when we were young and we were in that formative stage of our career, and then when we get that opportunity to bring it back to people, it's but I love that story that you waited at
5
Galen,
days.
yeah, 5 days. And then Galen
Yeah.
was like, oh, he just couldn't slow down. I can imagine him right now. And
Yeah.
just, and that special relationship that you and Galen had, that was, it was so exemplified in our Chungtong trip of 2002, which is
Yeah.
another one of the stories that's in your book.
Yeah. That expedition was also very formative. And just to continue on the Conrad influence arc here, Conrad invited me on an expedition, on my first National Geographic expedition in 2003, which is where I got to cross the Changtang Plateau with Conrad, Rick Ridgway, and Galen Rowell. It was my first National Geographic trip. I published my first National Geographic photos from that trip in the magazine, in the Yellow Border magazine. And it was also where Rick Ridgway took me under his wing and taught me how to film. And that was a hugely pivotal moment in my career, because I was finally kind of brought into the National Geographic family. I came off of that expedition having learned how to film. And again, due to Conrad inviting me along, these are some very important moments in my career. And, I've always been grateful for, your belief in me from the beginning. And it's, it set me on this trajectory in my career that I never could have imagined, nor did I ever even dream of, becoming a filmmaker. And it was in large part due to those early moments in my career. I think I was, late 20s, trying to figure it out, just piecing together a photography career. I had literally a couple milk crates with slide sheets hanging in these milk crates in the back of my car. And, there was like holes in the back of my car. So there's dust poofing up behind the driver's seat, and my slides were covered in dust. And that was the beginning of my photography career, was these milk crates with slide sheets that were totally getting annihilated while I traveled around the country. That was the beginning. And I think obviously it's been a pretty wild and extraordinary career since then. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about this process of putting the book together was just, I think I have memories of certain moments on all of these different expeditions that stand out. But in going back into the archives and finding all these old images or moments of images that never got published, I just got to relive so many of these kind of outrageous moments that in my mind had kind of disappeared and fallen off to the wayside, because you only think of like the big moments, but there's so many incredible moments on the side. You're just like on the Changtang trip when we were driving off-road for 5 days just to get dropped off at our starting point, right? And that moment, of you, Rick, and Galen and I inside the tent with the Drokpas, the Tibetan nomad herders, literally out in the middle of nowhere. Like, you would never imagine that people could live that high in the Tibetan plateau with nobody around. And what a moment that was, drinking milk tea in their tent. And
Oh, it was classic. I mean, they have these herds of sheep and they're out there nibbling on the stubble and they herd them up and they live in these woolen tents. And instead of a refrigerator, they have a sheepskin with the food underneath it. And they're like, oh, come have some food with us and have some tea. And you're always gracious and like, well, yes, I will have some. But the best part was that we Rick and you and I, we still joke about it when we met the fellow that he was working on something and he had a hammer or some implement
Right.
in his hand and he just it just dropped out of his hand because it was like, where did these people show up and what are these things they're pulling? It was just completely, it was,
We might as well have been aliens.
yeah. And then the time we had the banana,
Yeah.
we had bananas. Oh,
He'd never seen a banana, so he couldn't, the gentleman couldn't figure out what it was. He thought it was a tool. Remember, he was hitting it on the table. But I was just looking at some of these images from the book, and these kind of great moments. Galen, crossing the Changtang Plateau, he's hauling these carts that we had to haul. And I think these stories, just because they're some of the older stories, and they were pre-social media, and they were, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know some of the stories that are in the opening end of the book, all shot on slide transparencies, but really formative moments. And that's the other thing too, is once when I was kind of finishing putting the book together, I was looking at all the different arcs in it. Our partnership is climbing partners and friends, but also the kind of evolution of storytelling and the photography and even the technology over that period of time of 20 years, going from slide transparencies and shooting on expeditions, carrying 100 or 200 rolls of film, leaving for 3 months or 2 months, shooting all these rolls of film, trying to get them, there was obviously only one copy of you couldn't back things up like you can now. And so how carefully, you hand carried all the rolls of film back, and you never saw an image until, potentially a few weeks after you got back from an expedition. And what kind of exercise of discovery it was to get these slides and slide them into the sheets, and then start looking at all the different images that you shot months beforehand, and you kind of didn't really know what you had. And then going all the way through to now, where you take the shot and you can chimp it and look at it and know exactly what you're getting right in the moment. What a different process it was even at the beginning of this book. But the evolution of storytelling and my understanding of storytelling had transformed so much, because when I first started, it was literally just trying to make a pretty picture, or a picture that I thought was cool. Then you start to shoot for editorial, and you started eventually shooting for National Geographic and their standards of visual storytelling and photography, obviously being the bar, and learning so much from the other photographers there, and the photo editors there, and the pressure you feel when you're shooting for the Geographic.
sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Hotel
Just
form.
how much it has shaped my capacity to tell stories. Oh, I think I know which hotel you're at even, because I've been at that one. Is that the London or is
I'm
that
at the
the,
London, yeah.
I
So,
called it. That's how much time I've been flying around LA. Oh my gosh.
oh yeah, I'm probably in the Jimmy Chin room here. So they were like, but it's guys love it
Yeah.
coming here in LA and part of that. But yeah, to think that you'd have to shoot the film, it was in the cassette, and then you had no idea, so you got back. And were you overexposed or was it blurry?
Yeah.
Was your focus on there? And the technology has changed, and now it's like, oh, here's a selfie with our son or Jenny and I, our family, and I'll take like 6 of them, and smile in different ways. And
Yeah.
then it'd be like, okay, one frame, we'd be like, that's going to be the picture. And I look back at my slide archives, and I guess they're cute and appreciative because they're so basic in the format. I was never a talented photographer, but yeah, seeing that the mentorship with Galen when we were on the Chungtong was just phenomenal. And having been around Galen on other expeditions, and he kept his secrets close to his chest. But with you, it was like, I'm teaching you everything. And it was just, when the light is good, and just there was this yeah, and it was in retrospect, it was meant to be, because it was that August after the expedition that
Yeah.
he and his wife Barbara perished in a small plane accident. And so is we appreciate Galen and his insight and what he was able to do to create the genre of outdoor photography, and that first image of climbing Half Dome on in Nat Geo. And he was like, oh yeah, I had the climber put red socks on, like tube socks that came up to knickers. I mean, like, not the
Give
type of
more
clothing.
color in the photo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to see that progress on to where you're there with Alex and in the same rope length of that climb, looking out over the Sierras, to see that connection be made, and sort of the continuity of life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's no photo school or education I could have gotten as a photographer that could have come close to spending, a couple months with Galen on assignment for the Geographic. Galen was 62. He'd been photographing on assignment for what, 30 plus years, and to see someone work like that in person, up close, on an expedition together, nothing will ever be able to replace that sort of education, because it's not even like he had to teach it so much. Like, I was living it, I was seeing it. It was so immediate. It formed so many aspects of how I work, because, like you with your climbing, when I saw Galen do something, I knew that it had been refined for 30 years, if not longer, because he might have learned that from someone else who'd already refined it for, 30 years before him. And that's been the beauty and the joy of understanding like what you're getting in mentorship. So when I first started climbing with you, I'd watch what you were doing and I'd think, okay, well, this is refined from 25 or 30 years of climbing. Who knows how many expeditions, how many walls, but you had already been refining something that had been refined before you, and so just being able to see, how you approached climbs and thought about climbs was, hugely informative and a blessing to me and many people, really. And I talk a bit about that in the book, just the value of mentorship, what I've gotten out of it, how it's touched really so many aspects of my life. But then the storytelling, the visual storytelling, eventually evolved another step from the photography assignments and editorial assignments, where it really informed how I approached filmmaking, and just creating the mosaic of visual moments that could tell a story. That really is so much of filmmaking, and shooting a scene and understanding a scene, and then thinking about how to shoot images that have subtext to them, and or that are more than just the image, that they're metaphor for something else. That really informed the filmmaking. And now this next level, it feels like the filmmaking is now kind of coming back and informing the photography. So it's been a pretty crazy ride in terms of this book, because I started to see all of the different pieces that made it come together, and how it's kind of coming back around on itself. So I'm excited to share it with folks. It was my COVID project. It was actually, it's funny because I wanted to do it 10 years ago. I was like, okay, this is, I've been shooting for 10 years. I've got tons of material. I'm going to do a 10-year retrospective. And then it took another 10 years to get motivated to do it. Or at least find a moment to do it. But it was the right moment. It was the right moment. I think it encapsulates a lot of, that evolution I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
The hardest part though was the writing. But very, very fortunate. John, John Krakauer. I hate asking favors of John, because I know how many people come to him, for requests and help. And I was in the kind of throes of trying to figure out how to write it and how I should approach each of these chapter introductions. And I finally called John and I was like, I need help. And he was so kind. He helped edit and read through every one of those chapter introductions, which there's 16 of them. And the book is essentially broken into 16 of the most kind of influential, and for me, in terms of imagery, the most iconic expeditions in my career. And then between each chapter and each expedition are interstitial images. Usually it's a story or a moment that stood out. Smaller expeditions, people that were very close, that I was really close to. I think there's a section on Steph Davis and a section on Dean Potter. And that's how it's kind of glued together, is kind of the, these bigger expeditions. And then you had a chance to go through the whole thing, huh?
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. And thank you for the copy that when we were together last week in New York. And I've read the book, and I love the way that it's set up sequentially, and then you get to travel around the world and with essays that highlight a little bit of that story, so you can then kind of imagine yourself in there. And yeah, that's photography and filmmaking, they're relatively new and to human history in terms of the way that we tell stories. I mean, we'd probably initially yeah, I chased that mammoth into the cave sink and we got food and it's good, however that might
Let's
be.
carve the story on the wall.
Yeah, and then to the written word, to visuals, and then now with photography being relatively new, 150, 160 years old or something like that, and then filmmaking and all of those ways that that there's so much information that's in those images, that to me, that there's the emotional, personal story that we were on this climb and what was it like, and do I remember that being stuck in the portal edge with Brady and Chiracusa on K7 and getting battered by a storm. But then there's other ones that are like the Shiru, and I'm studying animals, and there's knowledge and science based in that, looking at glaciers that are different with that. And there's so many ways that we can understand and learn from photography, and to bring them into a book like this, like it's sort of like, the 20 years, it's like it's like the musician's greatest hits album. So kudos to you, Jimmy. What
Yeah,
band would you be, Jimmy, if it was?
I don't know. That's a pretty crazy band.
Yeah.
So many wild moments. Yeah. And with so many incredible characters and people. I really did want to honor many of the people who were in my life, that allowed me to, try to tell their stories and take photographs of them. There's that relationship between the photographer and the subject, that I don't take for granted. And I wanted to make sure that, I did honor them in a way that, hopefully people get a sense of the fact that, like, these images aren't just mine, like, so much of the photography comes as a collaboration, and I don't know that people necessarily understand that, but particularly in the type of work that we do, when we're up in the mountains, shooting, sometimes it adds a lot to what might already be a very challenging situation, right? And you've waited for me and done extra work for me to get a shot. I'm sure probably enough effort to climb Everest multiple times for the amount of effort you've had to put out over the years.
Oh, yeah, and likewise to you. I can remember sleeping in a tent in the Bugaboos, and I got up early, and I'm like, Jimmy, the light, and you were like out like that, and then we snapped some pictures, and
Yeah,
enjoyed that sunrise, and it was that recognition of our teamwork together at that moment was pretty special. And that whereas I might have working with other photographers, I'm like, hey, let's consider this, and they're like, I'm the photographer here, please. I'll tell you what you need to do. But it was like, well, let's try this on. Where would that be? And we were there because we were climbing, and there was fires that were going off, and
yeah,
just for that, good light only lasts 2 or 3 minutes, and you have to be there for it.
yeah. Well, I wish we could go over so many of the stories in here. I think the last chapter I wrote was really about our climbing partnership. And, I hope people can read that. And some of my favorite photographs of my career are probably from that trip. And, that climb for me on Alatana was like the ultimate confluence of so many years of shooting. My favorite type of shooting, which I think is like the purest form of what I do, is when you're on an expedition with one other climbing partner and you're shooting on the fly, and the moments are just happening in front of you. Those feel the most real, and those also, being in Queen Maudland, that was like it was like the best climb and shoot for me. So that's towards the end of the book.
Climbing up the off-widths and all the craziness.
Yeah. It was such a crazy
It was emotional too. Your father, Frank, had passed away, and I remember like 5 days before we go on the trip, you're like, hey, this just happened. And it was, you were resolute in your desire to go down there. And in a way, it was to honor both your parents, and both my parents have passed away. And so there was, when you get to that point in life, you realize that you're there because of the grace of others and the benefit of others and their love for you. And that was, yeah, that was, yeah, those are,
That was a
I'm just
special
thinking
time.
of those memories make me happy right now.
Yeah. Being
So-
sitting in negative 50-degree winds on the summit at like 2 a.m, that makes you happy.
Oh.
I bet.
Yeah, yeah, it would be like, yeah, but
Yeah.
if those of you that read There and Back with Jimmy's book, and may it inspire your own expeditions and encourage you to get your camera out there and create art and to find those bonds, those connections. And the I really loved the chapter about Yosemite, and that when you were there on assignment to capture Yosemite, and the people living in Camp 4 and the rescue team and the climbers and slacklining and base jumping, all these different aspects of what was it like. And that is sort of that time capsule of Yosemite at that time is beautiful. And there's been photographs, Tom Frost, black and white in the early days of Yosemite, and that helped define that. And so there's those moments that bring us back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a special one. I didn't know how to write about it until I started to think about that was my first real feature article for the magazine. So I think I wrote a lot about what it feels like, what kind of pressure you feel like when you're shooting for National Geographic. It's like shooting for no other magazine, you know, the pressure you put on yourself. So just another one of the stories in there. I think we probably need to wrap up, but Conrad, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and for being a great friend and mentor. And this book literally would not exist without you. So thank you.
Oh, well, our friendship is most meaningful in the journeys that we've shared and continue to experience, and to see Chai and your success in the film, and then Marina and James, just, yeah. So
Growing up.
yeah, you were like, James is he's a little wired for a 5-year-old. And I'm like, okay, Jimmy, it's time for him to come up and chop some wood with Uncle Rad.
Yep. That's right.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Adam.
Cool. Hello. Well, Jimmy and Conrad, thank you so much for talking. Like, this was a complete honor to just see you two talking about your lives and what you've been doing for such a long time. It was so rad. I want to thank North Face for letting us talk with you. Jimmy, congratulations on this book documenting a huge part of your life. It has just been an honor, and I want to thank everyone for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
It has been
happy holidays.
Yeah.
Best of Tattered Cover.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, North Face.
Yeah.